Look, Australia's currently in something of an immigration crisis, if you like. Well, at least there's a pretty hefty debate. Soaring rates amongst the highest in the Western world, and it's contributing to everything from traffic chaos to very high house prices. Now, I'm an immigrant myself from Bangladesh. Now, I think it's really critical for any country to foster dynamism and new energy. So I agree overall with bringing in immigrants, but there are obviously limits. Now, Donald Trump is now eyeing the focus on skilled migrants that countries like Canada and Australia have. Now, I think this is realistic because there's a much bigger challenge of integrating unskilled migrants. Now, I joke, if the Statue of Liberty inscription were written today, it might say something like this: give me your educated, those that might soar, the ones that do well on the skills test score. Now, okay, it's not as inspiring as the original lines celebrating the promise of America to unlock the potential of the world's poor, but it does illustrate today's reality. Now, often the debate in immigration pits natives against immigrants. Now, this misses the fact that the group most affected by high migration are other immigrants, especially newly arrived immigrants. Now, this is outlined well by one of my favourite thinkers, Rehan Salam, writing in the National Review, and I'll quote, "The ongoing influx of less skilled workers puts economic pressure on the less skilled immigrants who already reside in our country, and it reinforces their cultural separation from those who belong to other ethnic groups." So this is where, by including all immigrants, figures locally in Australia like Tony Abbott, a major politician, you can potentially alienate allies among ethnic groups who can also see the dangers of unskilled migration. Now, to be fair, another issue is there are a lot of new immigrants. They're not going to be so affected by traffic or congestion. You know, if I've just come from Mumbai or Shenzhen, places like Sydney, Melbourne, Toronto, they look like prosperous fishing villages. Now, regardless, globalisation and automation put enormous pressure on the wages of low-skilled labour. Now, in decades past, immigrants who struggled economically or maybe wanted to keep stronger ancestral ties with their native countries, they just go home. Today, you've got intensive welfare safety net, as well as communications technologies, which means that your incentives to return home are much lower. In Australia, low-skilled migrant labour usually comes in the form of refugees, those that arrive through family reunion, which is almost a third of our intake, and lots from New Zealand as well, who have sort of special privileges here. Now, many international students who come here as permanent residents, even though they're categorised as skilled when they get residency, they actually end up getting pretty shoddy degrees and end up in the unskilled labour market. If you're a native, at least you can make use of your superior English, where low-skilled migrants compete against other migrants at the bottom of the labour market. They also increase the productivity of skilled workers like me because we can outsource mundane tasks to cheap immigrant labour. So this actually worsens inequalities. Now, refugees are a really good example of how challenging it is to gain an economic foothold for those of, say, limited skills and not the best English. Now, local academic Peter Whiteford, who's at the Australian National Universities, he studied refugees in Australia between 2002 and 2011. Now, in the initial years, people were pretty driven, wanted to find work, but within a few years, they all shifted to the disability pension, which you're often for mental health reasons. And this is exactly what I see. All migrants, arrive wide-eyed, full of hope, and they're usually ashamed to accept welfare, but you become demoralised, especially in today's labour market challenges. Now, what Whiteford found is that a decade later, refugees were 4 times more likely to be on welfare. I mean, it's pretty significant. In the past, they might have just joined factories, but they can't do that anymore. Now, the offspring are likely to be more successful, but if we have poorer outcomes now for refugees, there's a risk that the next generation will be the underemployed or the deviant of our society. And some of the problems in Sudanese youth we've had in Australia illustrate this. So you could argue some of the money spent on refugees locally could be spent elsewhere. I mean, one of the top migration experts in the world, Oxford professor Paul Collier. Now, he looked at countries like Canada, Australia, Norway, who we actually spend the most on resettlement, over $100,000 a year per refugee. Now, if you spent this money elsewhere, for example, the Jordanian government supports special economic zones that might allow Syrian refugees to work there while living in exile. This might be a far better solution. Now, another interesting social issue that comes from bringing in less skilled migrants is that they're more likely to marry people of their own ethnic background, including going back to their native countries for arranged marriages. Now, this registers in our generous family reunion program, which is almost a third of our total intake. Now, this might seem harmless, But over time, such trends heighten an ethnic identity at the expense of a more cohesive national one. The spouses are also likely to be underskilled too. Now, at a time when there's so many debates going around national identity, this sort of trend presents complications. Now, intermarriage between ethnic groups is actually critical to avoid social fracture into competing ethnic tribes. Now, a marker of countries like Australia and Canada's success are our high rates of mixed marriage. Now, Australia's future, like Canada's, really depends on a degree of migration to support our ageing population. Now, we both have an appropriate focus on skilled migration, but when you consider the high levels of unskilled migration anyway, and the fact that integrating them has never been tougher, these policies might not even be strict enough. I'm Tanvir Ahmed. If you like this video, please subscribe to Rebel Media.